Less than 5 seconds had passed when Carly Spencer woke up, and she was overcome with guilt. She was lying on her left side and found herself practically face to face with her lover, who had appeared before her for the first time in 10 years of marriage. Damn. Aristotle Klesko is a handsome man, she thought, looking at his sleeping face. His curly dark brown hair framed a face that was perfect. He just opened his big brown eyes and looked at her puppy dog-like, and her guilt instantly disappeared. Guilt? What guilt? Carly's flight home from San Francisco to Wichita always seemed to take forever. She often joked that it was a flight from the bright lights to the dark times. The flight gave her plenty of time to think about her last trip, especially what she had done last night and this morning. Aristotle Klesko was the Assistant Vice President of Marketing at the home office of Sebastian Electronics, a national supplier of home heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems, commonly referred to as HVAC. Carly had noticed that the 30-year-old man was strikingly handsome when he appeared at the company's last quarterly meeting in December. Carly recalled being as tongue-tied as she had been as a teenager on a first date when she first met the man at an evening social gathering. They talked for at least an hour that evening and had dinner together as part of a small group on 2 nights during the 5-day conference. After the conference, they kept in touch, mostly through text messages but sometimes with phone calls, and over time the messages seemed to become more flirtatious. They confessed to each other that they were looking forward to seeing each other at the March conference, and Aristotle told the woman that he had reserved a table for just the 2 of them for dinner on the last evening of the upcoming conference. Carly always returned to Wichita on Saturday afternoon after the conference ended because there were no late flights out of Wichita on Friday evening. Those dark times again. During the conference, they spent a significant amount of their free time together. Ari, as she called him, seemed to be as in love with her as she was with him. From Ari's perspective, Carly was more than intriguing. Although she said she was happily married to a great guy, the 35-year-old woman began flirting with him from the moment they met. He was also married with 2 young children, but when the attractive blonde with curves began flirting with him, at first without invitation, his wedding vows didn't seem as binding as they should have been. Friday night dinner at a quiet, upscale Greek restaurant was wonderful, Carly would have said if asked. The evening continued and both felt excited, and Carly, without hesitation, agreed to his request to go up to his room after dinner. Ari was from Phoenix, and although there were several flights from San Francisco to Phoenix that evening, Ari booked an extra night at the hotel, telling his wife he wanted to attend the final dinner on Friday night to spend more time with her. Since the company was paying for the extra night, Ari told Carly that she would have no problem staying another day. Carly was fully aware that her feelings for Ari went beyond her vows. This was new territory for her. She had never before considered cheating on the man she considered her soulmate. Walter Spencer and Carly Abraham got married 18 months after meeting at a party at a mutual friend's house. The mutual attraction was immediate. Both were good-looking, intelligent, and well-presented. Walter, whom his friends called Spence, was of Nordic descent, with typical physical features: blonde, blue-eyed, and tall. As mentioned earlier, Carly was also blonde and blue-eyed, but only 5 feet 2 inches tall, a full foot shorter than Spence. To almost everyone, Spence and Carly were the perfect couple. People often advised them to get a room because they seemed to be constantly touching each other and blowing kisses. 10 years later, they seemed just as in love as they had been 6 months earlier. The only fly in the ointment of their marriage was Carly's apparent inability to have children. The couple began trying to conceive after 3 years together, and when she didn't get pregnant after 2 years, they both sought medical attention. Carly was diagnosed with serious reproductive issues, and doctors told her that her chances of getting pregnant were virtually nil. After several weeks of seeking other opinions and considering adoption, they decided to remain childless. At least they wouldn't have to spend money on condoms or birth control pills, they noted. As Carly and Ari drove back to the hotel where Ari was staying, the butterflies in Carly's stomach wrestled with the conflicting thoughts racing through her head. Her attraction to the handsome young man was winning the battle against her common sense. Ari had reminded her several times during the week that what her husband didn't know wouldn't hurt him, and he would never find out. As soon as they crossed the threshold of Ari's room, he wrapped his arms around her and kissed her passionately, effectively winning the battle for her heart. At that moment, she eagerly anticipated Ari becoming the first man other than Walter to have sex with her in over 12 years. Having decided to let Ari have her way, Carly resolved to get the most pleasure she could out of the experience, and to do everything in her power to make sure the young man did everything he could. She would make sure Ari never forgot it, and she would never forget it either, she decided. Part of Carly's strategy to make sex more meaningful for Ari was to be more demonstrative and verbal than she usually was with her husband. This strategy seemed to work flawlessly, as Ari reacted wildly to her extra wriggling, putting on a performance that she would describe as the best sex of her life. When they woke up in the morning, they had sex again. After breakfast together in the hotel dining room, they took an Uber to the airport. At the airport, they kissed goodbye, and then each went their separate ways to the boarding gate. An hour and a half later, Carly was on her way back to Wichita to her unsuspecting husband. Including a stop along the way, Carly had 8 hours to think about her. Cheating with Ari Klesko. It couldn't exactly be called a romance. After all, it was just one night and the next morning. But it was definitely cheating. Yes, the two had consumed several alcoholic beverages, but it was hardly a mistake made out of carelessness while intoxicated. These two knew where they were going before the conference even started. The dinner they had booked was nothing more than a confirmation of their connection. At first glance, Carly could have said that the sex she had with Ari was the best of her life. However, in the light of day, she realized that while it was really good sex, it didn't even come close to what she had ever had with Walter. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that cheating on Ari had given her no more pleasure than being with her husband. Exposing yet another urban myth, she smiled sardonically to herself. For the first time in her life, Carly wondered if her husband would ever find out that she had been making love just a few hours ago. It was normal for them to have welcome home sex whenever Carly returned from a trip. The anxiety and guilt that began to build inside her twisted her stomach into a knot by the time she arrived at the airport. Walter noticed that his wife looked unwell when he met her at the airport terminal. "Are you okay, honey? You look a little green around the gills," he commented. "My stomach's a little upset," she admitted. "Maybe I should go straight to bed when we get home." Walter had no reason to think his wife's stomach problems were due to anything else. When you trust someone... On Sunday evening, Carly and Walter did meet, but as each of them later noted to themselves, something had definitely changed. Walter noticed that Carly seemed to be just going through the motions, and for her part, Carly's guilt began to eat away at her soul. Carrie broke the deadlock on Friday evening after they had spent another boring night together. She looked over at Walter and noticed that he was lying in bed just staring at the ceiling. "Last week, Walter. I slept with another man when I was in San Francisco." For several long seconds, a tense silence hung in the room. "What the hell are you talking about?" Walter raised his voice in the darkness. Carly jumped up. In 10 years of living together, Walter had only yelled at his wife a few times, and never before in the darkness of their bedroom. "It was a mistake. A stupid, selfish mistake. I'm sorry," Carly said quietly. "A mistake? As if you didn't know you were in bed with someone who wasn't me. Well, screw you. I can imagine how it could have happened." "No!" Walter shouted, jumping out of bed and pacing in the darkness. It was stupid. It was selfish. It definitely shouldn't have happened. It was a mistake," Carly said. So you're saying this was your first mistake? Or is this just one of many? What exactly are you trying to tell me, Carly? Walter asked cautiously. I'm telling you that this was the first time I ever cheated on you, and it will be the last. I'm so sorry, Walter, she said, starting to cry. Walter turned on the light in the room so he could see his wife's face clearly. Oh yeah, baby. It'll definitely be the last time you cheat on me, because I'm not giving you a second chance. Why, baby? Why did you do this to me? To us? Walter asked. Carly cringed at Walter's statement that there would be no second chance to cheat. Wait a minute, Walt. We hardly ever fight. We've had a good life together. One mistake and you're ready to just throw us away? She argued. I'm just following your example, baby. We had a good relationship, so why did you decide to sleep with another man? I think you're the one who left us, Walter growled. Carly winced at the truth of Walter's statement. I'm so sorry, Walter. This shouldn't have happened. The only thing I can tell you is what I was thinking. I lost my head and got carried away. I really love you, and I know this shouldn't have happened. All I can do is apologize. Unfortunately, I can't take back what I said. I can promise that if you give me another chance, I'll never make the same mistake again. Carrie saw the pain in Walter's eyes. She saw that he was holding back tears. Will I ever be able to trust you again? He whispered. I promise I won't make you regret this. Ever, she whispered back. Walter stopped pacing and stared at his wife. He knew she didn't have to confess. She could have just kept quiet and gone on with her life as if nothing had happened. The question was whether he could live with the pain. I'm already starting to regret that you left, he said clearly. Over the next few days, they talked to each other. Most of Carly's conversation focused on her desire to stay married to Walter. Most of Walter's thoughts focused on whether he could trust Carly in the future. Trust is hard to earn, and when it's lost, it seems impossible to regain, Walter told his wife, who could only nod silently in agreement. A week passed before Walter decided he would stay with his wife. He told her that it was her confession that had prompted him to stay with her. He said his love for her was unconditional, but he still believed the couple should seek counseling, and he expected her to stay away from her lover in future meetings. I'm not entirely comfortable with you going to conferences in the future, he told her. Just remember, there won't be a third chance. At Walter's insistence, Carly told him everything her still unnamed lover had done to her last week. At first, she resisted because she knew the details would hurt her husband, but he insisted loudly, saying he needed to know so that there would be nothing left unsaid between them, except her lover's name. She insisted that she would not tell Walter his name so that Walter would not harm him and end up in jail for assault or, God forbid, murder. Walter did see the logic in this argument and agreed with it for a moment. After Carly's confession, they didn't have an intimate relationship, but things gradually returned to normal when a few weeks later, Carly began experiencing bouts of nausea in the morning. Her personal assistant, Jennifer, noticed how bad she looked right after she threw up in the bathroom for the third time that week. If I didn't know about your problems, I'd say you're pregnant, Jennifer commented. I know the chances are ridiculously high, but I'd advise you to buy a home pregnancy test. Why don't you do it today when we go out for lunch? Not giving her friend's words much thought, Carly stopped by the pharmacy when the two of them went out for lunch. She waited for Sebastian to return before going to the restroom to take the test. Not believing the results of the first two tests, Carly took a third before emerging from the bathroom with a stunned but happy expression on her face. I'm pregnant! This is the closest thing to a miracle I can imagine, but I'm pregnant! She giggled as she approached Jennifer's desk and showed her the positive test. Jennifer, a mother of two, reacted positively but with restraint. After all, both women were in a business office. Congratulations! I bet you can't wait to tell Walter the good news, Jennifer said enthusiastically. Oh yes, I bet he'll be just as thrilled as I am. We tried for so long, but then we just stopped when it seemed like it was never going to happen, The doctors told us that, at best, we had little chance, Carly said. Carrie hummed to herself as she flitted around the kitchen preparing dinner when Walter walked in the door. He immediately sensed that something very good had happened in Carrie's world, and he wondered if it would turn out well for both of them. "Well," he asked, "are you going to share the news with me, or are you waiting for me to guess while you dance around?" Carly's smile was as radiant as it had been on their wedding day, Walter thought. She walked over to the table, picked up the bag, and handed it to her embarrassed husband. "I don't want to ruin your mood, but what am I looking at, baby? Is that why you're smiling so broadly?" he asked. "These are pregnancy tests, 3 to be exact, and they all say I'm pregnant." "Surprise!" Carrie threw herself into Walter's arms, making incoherent sounds of happiness and covering his face with kisses. "It's a damn miracle, Walt! It's a damn miracle! We have a 1 in a million chance! I'm pregnant!" Walter pressed his lips to his wife's, picked her up, and spun her around, rejoicing with her. "You're going to see a doctor, right?" he asked cheerfully. "They found some time for me the day after tomorrow," she replied. "But these tests usually come back positive. I'm going to be a mom and you're going to be a dad. How about that?" Walter sat down on a chair, looked at the pregnancy tests again, and began to sob. "I never thought this would happen. Never. Never." Dinner was late that evening as they spent the next 2 hours celebrating Carly's pregnancy in their bedroom. It was the first time they had made love since the night Carly confessed her infidelity. It seemed like the last thing on either of their minds that evening. However, by the next evening, Walter had had a whole day to think things over, and real life had replaced the emotional reaction of the previous day. In his reflections, Walter came to the conclusion that Carly's date had happened at a time that could make him a suitable candidate for the role of the child's father. Forgiving Carly for cheating was one thing, but Walter would never raise another man's child. The day after their celebration, there was a clash between them that he knew could turn out to be anything but festive. Dinner was fun, with Carly chatting non-stop about everything related to the baby. She was in such a high mood that she didn't notice Walter was mostly silent during the meal, muttering something from time to time and responding in monosyllables when asked. He waited until they were alone in the living room before broaching the subject that was weighing heavily on his mind. Carly, have you thought about the fact that a few weeks ago you slept with another man? And the baby might not be mine, but his?" Walter asked cautiously. It was immediately clear that Carly hadn't considered such a scenario, judging by the shocked expression on her face. She tried to speak several times, but the words wouldn't come out until, "Oh my God, oh my God. You can't really be worried about this, can you? This baby is a miracle, Walter." Walter lowered his head, embarrassed that he was actually worried about it. He raised his head, realizing that he had every reason to be concerned. "When I asked you what happened, you told me it was a Greek man with olive skin, dark hair, and brown eyes. You and I are both fair-skinned, blue-eyed blondes. If he's the father, there's a good chance the child won't look anything like me, and that's the problem. While I would never want to raise another man's illegitimate child, it would be especially humiliating to do so when everyone knows about it." Carly seemed shocked and wasn't thinking as quickly as she should have been. "So, what are you saying, Walter? I'm sorry for being stupid, but you're going to have to spell this out for me." "Oh, for God's sake, Carly!" Walter shouted. "If this child isn't mine, I can only see 3 options, none of which you're going to like. First, you have an abortion. Second, you have the baby and give it up for adoption. Third, you keep the baby and we get a divorce. I'm not raising someone else's child, especially if it looks like Zorba the Greek." Wait. If this child isn't yours, do you want me to get rid of it, or will you divorce me? This is a miracle child, Walt. I've always wanted children, and now I'm going to have one. I will never give birth to this child and leave it to someone else, even if it means we have to divorce. I can find another husband. I'll probably never be able to have children again. One miracle in my life is probably all I'm allowed, said Carly, her big eyes filling with tears. Walter couldn't believe what he had just heard. He literally jumped up, grabbed his car keys, and ran out of the house. When he returned home an hour later, Carly was already in bed. Walter set the alarm on his phone and slept on the couch, which became a regular occurrence over the next few weeks. At Walter's insistence, Carly scheduled a DNA test for the fetus at 10 weeks. Carly continued to insist that the father of the child was not important to her, and that it shouldn't be important to him either if he truly loved her. That's easy for you to say. You're not the one who's going to be humiliated for the next 20 years, he remarked. To Walter's horror, the DNA test conducted a few weeks later revealed that the child Carly was carrying was not her husband's. The results were sent directly to Walter's office, and the first thing he did when he came to his senses was to make an appointment with a family lawyer recommended by a divorced friend. Carly found out about the test results the moment Walter walked into their house and threw the envelope at her while she was cooking dinner in the kitchen. She didn't get a hello, a nod, or even a fuck you when Walter went upstairs to change into his work clothes. Coming downstairs, he headed straight for the refrigerator, grabbed a bottle of beer, opened it, and plopped down in his favorite chair in the living room. The baby might not look like him, Walter. It might look like me and be a blue-eyed blonde, which would suit you just fine. I guess we won't know until he or she is born, she said, trying unsuccessfully to sound cheerful. Maybe. Stop it, Carly, Walter growled. If you really cared about my feelings, you wouldn't have had this child. It's as simple as that. This isn't our child, Carly. It's your child, and some unnamed man's. I have no connection to your miracle baby, but that doesn't matter to you. It's all about what you want. At least, that's what you think. I have a meeting with a lawyer the day after tomorrow. I'm tired of worrying about what you want. I don't want a divorce, Walt. I love you, and you love me. I know that, Carly whimpered. I do love you, Carly, but right now I'm not sure I like you very much. How many more times can you disrespect me? Walter asked. I'm going to spend some time in a hotel, away from you, so I don't strangle you to death. I've never hurt a woman before, pregnant or not. But right now you're an inch away from being the first. But we can't talk if you're not here. We need to talk, she said. No, I don't need to talk to you right now. I really, really need to think. And don't call me every 5 minutes because I won't answer. Carly called Walter several times a day, every time he wasn't home. She always left him love messages and begged him to come home to her. On the 5th day after his departure, Walter was sitting at lunch when he received a call from his mother-in-law, a woman he found repulsive and did not consider one of his admirers. Walter assumed that Vera Abraham was calling to scold him for thinking about divorce, even though it was her daughter who had cheated on him. Vera was indeed calling on behalf of her daughter, but not to lecture Walter. She called to tell him that Carly had fainted at home while getting ready for work and was at the local hospital. He told Vera he would be at the hospital in 20 minutes. When Walter arrived at the hospital, Carly was hooked up to several machines, but she looked healthy. Her mother was sitting on a chair next to the bed. Walter walked over to the nearest nurse's station, showed her his ID, and asked about his wife's health problems. This morning, your wife lost consciousness due to what the doctor diagnosed as severe stress. Her blood pressure skyrocketed to a critical level. The doctor gave her medication to help lower her stress levels. Judging by what she told us about your current problems, your presence here should help her, said the nurse, putting away the patient's chart. Carly's face broke into a wide smile when Walter entered the room. You came. I wasn't sure you would agree, she said. I love you, baby, even though I'm not very happy with you right now. Of course I couldn't not come, Walter said, nodding to his mother-in-law. Walter stayed with his wife for the rest of the day. She spent most of the day chatting aimlessly and incessantly with him and her mother. She only occasionally mentioned the couple's current problems, always telling Walter that she needed him to come home. Walter couldn't deny his love for his wife. He decided that for now, he would return home. Carly burst into tears when he told her. The next day, Walter told Carly that he would stop the divorce proceedings and raise her child as his own if she agreed to certain conditions. Walter would be listed as the father on the birth certificate. Carly would never contact her father again, and her apparent indiscretion would never be discussed. She would have to tell anyone who wanted to discuss the child's parentage that she had made a mistake. Her husband had forgiven her, and the two of them were now the parents of the child. End of story. "My God, Walter, will you do this for me? For us?" she asked. "Yes, baby. I love you. I never get tired of telling you that." "I mean it," Walter said. Carly burst into tears and hugged her husband tightly. Carly had already told her parents about the pregnancy and the affair while she was in the hospital. Walter decided that they needed to talk to their parents face to face, so they planned to take a 2-hour drive the following Friday evening and spend the weekend there. "I'm uncomfortable doing this with you," Carly said. "Can't you go alone?" "You're going to get your share of the blame for this, baby. You created this situation. I'm not going to be the only one who has to deal with this shit. Do you understand me?" Walter asked. Carly nodded silently and swallowed. "Your mom is definitely going to kick my ass. I guess I deserve it." Walter raised his eyebrows, looking at his wife. "Imagine the conversation I'm going to have with my father." "Damn it," Walter said. Walter and Carly arrived at his parents' house around 8 p.m. After the usual small talk and settling in, Walter told his parents that he and Carly needed to discuss something important. The conversation that followed shocked and saddened Walter's parents. "How could you, Carly? How could you?" Francine Spencer asked, glaring fiercely at her son's wife. Carly sat motionless in her chair, staring at the floor, while her mother-in-law literally breathed fire. Jeff Spencer patted his wife's hand several times to get her attention. When she finally looked at him, he shook his head slightly. She nodded back at him. Jeff Spencer rose from his chair and motioned for his son to follow him into the kitchen. He walked over to the bar and took out a bottle of 15-year-old single-malt Scotch whiskey called Glenlivet. He poured the drink into 2 glasses and added a teaspoon of water to each before handing one to his son. Walter knew his father was about to tell him something he considered very important. Walter knew his father considered single-malt Scotch to be the pinnacle of distillation and only brought it out for special occasions and important conversations, such as the one that was about to take place. "I understand that you love her, but you have to be 100% committed to the child, or it won't work," Walter's father began. "You can't just talk about the child. You have to love him or her unconditionally, just as if he or she were your own flesh and blood, no matter what shit comes your way. If you can't love this child completely, unconditionally, then don't waste other people's time and most of all, your own. If you're going to do this, do it right, son. You've got the shoulders for it. Do it right." Walter and his father always got along well. Walter was the second of Jeff and Francine's 3 children, their only son, and there had always been a special bond between them. Walter took comfort in the fact that his father had always had his back, and he promised his father that he would always have his son's back. "I'll handle it, Dad. I promise," Walter promised. They clinked glasses and then sipped their whiskey. When they returned to the quiet living room, Jeff nodded to his wife, and she nodded back. Walter caught the nod and knew that something had been decided. "Would you like a cup of tea now, Carly?" Francine's voice sounded warm again. Carly looked up at her hopefully. She noticed that everyone else in the room was looking at her with smiles on their faces. 7 months later, before Carly was brought in, her gynecologist warned everyone in the delivery room that her baby was the result of marital infidelity and might not look anything like her husband, which ruled out any awkward moments during the birth. This was done out of courtesy to Walter and proved to be the right decision when a boy with olive skin, dark eyes, and curly, dark brown hair was born. Walter, who had attended all of Carly's prenatal classes, watched intently as his son came into the world. Carly was too busy to notice the fleeting disappointment on her husband's face when he first saw the darker skin tone, but he quickly hid his initial disappointment with a broad smile. "He's beautiful, Carly. Thank you," Walter said. True to his father, Walter tried his best to be an excellent father to his son. He coached his son's Little League team, attended his youth football games, assembled numerous Lego sets, and even learned Spanish to help the boy learn the language in school. Only a few times in all the years his son was growing up did someone have the audacity and bad taste to ask questions about the boy's origins within earshot of his father. The first man had a bloody mouth and a knocked-out tooth, while the second, a man 4 inches taller and 40 pounds heavier than Walter, limped constantly after Walter damaged his anterior cruciate ligament in a fight started by the larger man. Bobby McNeil was a man as strong as a fire hydrant, standing 190 centimeters tall and weighing what looked like an extra 15 kilograms. Few people realized that he was a black belt in 3 disciplines and had grown up in a rough neighborhood. He taught what he called combat sports, with a twist, a combination of martial arts and street fighting, which certainly did not conform to the rules of the Marquess of Queensberry. When Walter decided to stay with Carly and raise another man's child, he knew that sooner or later things could get complicated. A friend gave him Bobby McNeil's number, and Walter spent 3 years training at his gym. After Walter heard a couple of loudmouths who questioned his son's parentage and a couple more who insulted his wife for being a whore, rumors spread that Walter Spencer might be a good guy, but he was quick to fly off the handle when it came to anyone messing with his wife or son. Walter wasn't stupid enough to think it wasn't happening behind his back, but after a while, no one had the guts to say it to his face or within earshot. For her part, Carly mostly stuck to the agreement she had made with Walter when he agreed to call off the divorce. Not only did she never cheat on Walter again, but she never once gave her husband the slightest hint that she was the best wife in the world. Blake Spencer was a smart kid, and by the age of 8, he realized that he was nothing like his parents. Although he didn't dwell on it, he wondered when they would tell him that he was adopted. Over the past couple of years, he had overheard several whispered conversations between his parents and his friends. When it didn't happen by the time he was 15, Blake realized he would have to bring it up himself. It wasn't something he was looking forward to. He decided to do it one evening at the dinner table. "Guys, were you ever going to tell me that I'm adopted?" Blake asked calmly. "You know, I'm not stupid or blind, and I can see that I don't look like either of you. I'm old enough to handle this, guys. I've heard some whispering over the years. I love you both madly, but don't you think I deserve the right to know?" Both parents looked shocked. Carly immediately blushed deeply. Walter grimaced, then took a deep breath. He knew this day would come. Carefully choosing his words and speaking in a calm tone, Walter told his son the whole story, including how he had considered divorcing his wife because of her infidelity and subsequent pregnancy. Walter watched the emotions play across his son's face as he listened. He also noticed that his wife had her eyes fixed on her dinner plate, which made it clear to him that she had no intention of getting any help with this. Walter didn't hide anything from his son. Obviously, the story didn't show Carly in a good light, but Walter wasn't going to lie to his son to make his wife look better. "So, you're not an adopted child," Walter concluded. "You are your mother's son by blood, and mine by love." Blake shifted his gaze from one parent to the other, his face impenetrable to his mother when she looked up, but not to his father, who could read the anger and despair in his son's eyes, especially when he looked at his mother. "She made a mistake, son. She confessed it herself. and I accepted her apology. The fact that she got pregnant was nothing short of a miracle. It wasn't him. It wasn't another man. Since then, she has shown me every day that she is completely devoted to me, to us. As for your real father, he's nothing more than a donor, Blake. I've been your father since the day you were born. I sat with you when you had the mumps. I taught you how to multiply, how to hit a baseball, how to shoot a basketball. That's what fathers do. Although it was a mistake and a miracle that you ended up here, but in my opinion, that's all. However, if you decide you want to know more about him, I won't stop you. But that's the only thing you'll have to do without me. I don't know who he is. I never asked. I don't want to know. Your mother will have to help you with that. Blake's breathing became more ragged. How could you, Mom? He asked hesitantly. Tears rolled down Carly's cheeks. There was no answer. Blake got up from the table, picked up his plate, and carried it to the sink. No, Dad. I don't need to know anything about my father. I'm fine, he said, turning and walking to his room. I'll handle it myself, kid, Walter said quietly to his wife as he followed his son up the stairs. Walter knocked on Blake's door and entered when Blake invited him in. They spent about 30 minutes talking quietly. The gist of what Walter told Blake was that his mother loved him very much, despite the terrible mistake she had made almost 16 years ago. But she cheated on you and had a child with another man. How could you accept that? Blake asked. She confessed to me when she didn't have to. She showed sincere remorse. You can't turn love off like you turn off a light. I decided that I still loved her. And if I loved her, I could love her child. If that child could be mine. And mine alone. That was the deal, Blake. I wouldn't share you with another father, unless you decided at some point that you wanted to meet him. I think that moment has come. If you want to know anything about him, that's your right, son. Your mother and I will make sure that happens. I have the best dad in the world. I don't need to know about my biological father, Blake said. They hugged tightly in the middle of the room. Now, I think you need to go downstairs and apologize to your mom, Walter said quietly. Apologize? Blake said. Why should I? He looked at Walter's face. The argument was over. Okay, Dad, he said, almost in a whisper. 3 years later, an incredibly proud Walter and Carly heard their son, their own son, give his valedictorian speech at his high school graduation. Blake had received a full academic scholarship to Stanford University and planned to major in genetics. You have a wonderful child, Walter. You and Carly should be really proud of him, said Dan Wilson, the father of one of Blake's good friends, approaching Walter and Carly immediately after the ceremony. Thank you, Dan. We think he's a very nice young man, too, Walter said, a tear of pride rolling from his right eye. By the way, congratulations to your son on his acceptance into the Air Force. Walter assumed his wife was acting strangely because of the stress of their son's wedding a few days later. As the groom's mother, Carly had very few responsibilities for the upcoming wedding, so her husband decided she was just worried about what place she would have in her son's life after he tied the knot. Walter knew that there was a special bond between mothers and sons that was different from the one he shared with his son. Blake met his fiancée, Rachel Bowman, at Stanford when they were younger. The couple got engaged a year after graduating from university. Both Walter and Carly were crazy about their future daughter-in-law, a tall, red-haired girl. Rachel never asked, but Blake eventually told her about his background so that there would be no serious disagreements between them after the wedding. Rachel was quite surprised by Blake's story because, in her words, Walter and Carly seemed so in love, so harmonious. My father forgave her and raised me as his own child. I mean, as his own son. He was a great role model for me. I never even asked my mother who my father was. I don't care, he said. The wedding, which took place a year later, was held in Rachel's hometown, about a 3-hour drive from the Spencers' hometown. Walter and Carly arrived about 3 days before the wedding, staying at a hotel in town with several other relatives, including Carly's mother, Blake's only surviving grandparent. Walter and his mother-in-law had never been close, but Walter tolerated her because she was Carly's mother. He was certain that she and her late husband knew who Carly's lover was, and his suspicions were reinforced by their occasional smirks in his direction. He never asked Carly who she told, and she never volunteered the information. Walter wasn't blind, and during the 2 days leading up to the ceremony, he had seen Carly and her mother whispering together several times, their heads close together. He assumed that Carly's ongoing strange behavior was somehow related to the whispering, but Carly denied that anything had changed when her husband asked her about it. It was a beautiful church ceremony. Carly's makeup had been smeared with tears from the moment the wedding march began. During the ceremony, she squeezed Walter's hand many times as they sat in the front row on the groom's side. "Look how handsome our son is," she whispered to him at one point. Walter and Carly walked arm in arm near the back of the church as they left after the ceremony, when Walter saw what he knew had been causing Carly's nervousness over the past few days. He was sitting alone, and although Walter had never seen this man before, he knew immediately who he was, as he looked like an older version of Blake. The man watched Blake and Rachel intently as they led the line to the reception, and didn't notice that Walter was watching him just as intently until he and Carly joined the line with Rachel's parents. The man never made it through the line of well-wishers, and Walter lost sight of him, only seeing him in a few photos when the cars began to line up to drive from the church to the reception at a nearby hotel. Walter didn't say a word to his wife about the man who drove up to the reception hall while she was happily chatting about the ceremony, repeating how handsome their son was and how beautiful their new daughter-in-law was. Walter knew that on this momentous day he should have been as happy as his wife, but that was obviously not going to happen, especially when he saw his son's older doppelganger sitting at a table in the reception hall. More photos were taken in the reception hall, and all the usual wedding activities took place, such as special dances, cake cutting, and speeches. An hour after the reception began, Walter was mingling with family and friends gathered in the lobby when he realized that his wife, son, and mother-in-law were missing. He sarcastically wondered to himself what the odds were that all three would be in their restrooms at the same time, and decided to check those odds as the knot in his stomach grew tighter. 4 heads turned in surprise when Walter entered the room, located just 2 doors down from the men's restroom. Carly and the unknown man looked agitated. Blake was clearly annoyed. "Why wasn't I invited to this private party?" Walter asked. "Glad you could make it, Dad," Blake said. "It seems Mom had a little wedding gift for me. Dad, meet the mysterious man formerly known only as my father, Aristotle Klesko. As I just found out, Mom sends my father information about my life every year, including photos. And since this is such a special day, she and Grandma decided that I should finally meet him." Now it was Walter's turn to be surprised. He had correctly guessed the identity of the mysterious man, but he had no idea that his wife had been keeping him informed about Blake's life, even though she had promised Walter that she would never contact this man again and that Blake would only meet him when he himself decided he wanted to. "So it wasn't your idea?" Walter asked his son. "Not in my life, Dad," Blake replied. "I could have lived my whole life without ever meeting my parent. I have a father. I don't need a pretender." Both Walter and Blake turned to Carly, who looked more than a little scared. "We had a deal, Carly. First, you cheated on me and got pregnant. Then you broke the second promise you made to me by telling that piece of shit about my son. My son, Carly. I'm the one who raised him, who loved him every minute of every day. What did his father give him other than getting his mother pregnant?" Tears streamed down Carly's face. She stumbled before finally responding. "Mom, and I We decided that Aristotle deserves to at least know about his son and be involved in his life, Carly said. I mean, legally, he could have claimed Blake as his own at any time and fought to visit him, so it was at least a way for him to stay close enough to ruin Blake's and our lives if he decided he wanted to, Walter interrupted. Hey, Aristotle spoke for the first time. Shut up! No one wants to hear a word from you, Blake growled. I never wanted to know you or anything about you. I don't care if you have other children. They mean nothing to me. A moment, a fart, nothing. Aristotle clenched his fists when he heard Blake's statement. Walter didn't miss it. Don't even think about it, Walter said quietly. After I beat the shit out of you, I'll talk to your wife, if you have one, and blow your world apart. How would you like to get divorced and pay child support for 18 years, which I could use to sue you for? I think that's a losing proposition for you. As for you, Walter said, turning to his wife, the first strike is cheating. The second strike is getting caught. This is your third strike. And as my favorite baseball umpires say, you're out of here. I can't believe you've broken my trust again. And from the looks of it, you didn't waste any time throwing my trust in the trash like you did all those years ago. I fell for the old, I love you so much, Walter line. I've been lied to for 25 years. Shit. It's over between us, baby. Have a nice life. Damn, another important week with Susan and now an urgent call from the boss, thought Darwin, lifting a large suitcase with one hand and a briefcase with the other. With no hands free, he pushed the door from the kitchen to the garage with his hip. It swung open with a bang, rebounded from the stop, and hit him hard on the shoulder. When he got home, he would fix that damn latch. He just didn't have enough time to spend with his family and do his usual chores. Stuffing the bags into the trunk of his Ford Taurus, Darwin slammed the lid shut and then yanked open the driver's door. It swung out with force, hitting his new BMW and scratching the paint. Typical of his luck. If he had to scratch a car, it might as well have been the company Ford, not his beloved BMW. Settling behind the wheel, he pondered his loss of control and the unfairness of the world. Quietly cursing the damage to his BMW, he opened the garage door and drove out onto the driveway. Turning onto the street, he glanced at the front door, then at the master bedroom window. Susan hadn't come out to see him off, but he thought he saw the curtains move. He hoped his wife had calmed down enough to at least see him off as he left for another damn week of repairs. If she did come out, she didn't wave goodbye as he drove away. The phone rang just before 9 in the morning, just in time not to interrupt their morning sex, but not so late that Susan had time to fully enjoy the post-sex bliss she loved so much. Me too, he thought. Darwin had promised her a fun night out on Saturday, and tomorrow morning they were going to leave for their lake house. It was already August, and they hadn't been to the lake once all summer. She was furious. He was disgusted, and the equipment at the factory in Houston was on siesta. He hoped he could get it started without another week there. The last time in Houston, it took 3 weeks. He couldn't get it through the factory manager's head that scheduled maintenance wasn't a waste of money on something that looked nice. Damn it, he thought. Houston in August, and my wife thinks this is some kind of pleasure trip. I should have taken her with me. This was his third emergency trip of the summer. No wonder Susan was furious. Damn it. It made him angry, too. In a way, he was glad he'd missed the evening. Susan had planned it with her best friend Darla and Darla's husband. He liked Darla. She was funny and smart, and she had model looks and shiny blonde hair. Darla and his petite wife Susan, with her curly hair, made a beautiful couple. But her husband, that leech Randy, was a different story. That son of a bitch was always hitting on Susan. He did it even when Darwin was there, and he didn't seem to care that Darla was nearby. The last time they went out, Darwin casually mentioned to Randy that the next time he caught his hands on his wife's ass while dancing, he would break his arm. He was a big, sloppy former college football player, a defensive lineman, and he laughed at Darwin. "Well, I'll be happy to show you how it's done." The thought struck him. He figured Susan would cancel the evening. He hadn't discussed it with her. He didn't want her going out with that bastard, even if Darla was with them. Susan was angry enough to spend an evening out on the town without him. Things hadn't been going well in his marriage lately. Susan had been talking about having children, and he liked the idea. But he wanted to be there to coach his daughter's softball team or his son's Little League team. And he didn't want to just hear about his children's exploits on the football field. His work schedule didn't allow for that. Susan was getting very impatient. She wanted children. Judging by how the money from his investments and bonuses was piling up, he would soon be able to afford to quit his 9-to-5 job. Hell, he hadn't worked 40 hours a week since the Truman administration, and his parents weren't even born then. "Damn it, this is just awful!" he raged as he sat behind the wheel. He had promised his wife that those hours would be a thing of the past once he had saved enough money. She just needed to be patient, that was all. An idea struck him. He hated it when that happened. He hadn't checked his author account at the bank. He wrote dirty romance novels for an e-book publisher under the pseudonym D. Troubadour. He put his royalties and other earnings into an account in his name. He planned to surprise Susan one day, but she still didn't know anything about it. The amount in the account was becoming impressive. Not what a real author could earn, but not bad for an amateur writing in his spare time. The money was untouched, just sitting there earning minimal interest. To tell the truth, he loved to write, even if it was hard work, but he was ashamed of the genre. He wrote novels. He liked those damn things. He loved reading them and he loved writing them, but deep down he thought that it was weak for a man to read them, let alone write them. Damn, he thought, I even hid my pen name so that women would think the author was a woman. He had enough time to catch his flight. He decided to check how much money he had in his account. Turning right at the next intersection, he headed for his bank branch. Driving through the drive-through window, he used his bank card to access his author's account. "Damn!" he blurted out before he could stop himself. The money had been coming in steadily, and he had accumulated a decent amount over the past year. But suddenly it had tripled. He remembered that he hadn't looked at his account since January, and his adventure novel had been published in February. Then he finished the novel he had been planning for a long time. Damn it, there was more than $250,000 there. Their investments, savings, and bank account were more, but they grew over time. It was unreal. He had enough capital to retire and live off the interest if he was careful and frugal. And he had no intention of giving up writing. As he pulled onto the road, his thoughts raced at a mile a minute. Damn it! I don't have to be in Houston until tomorrow? The only reason I'm leaving today is because of my boss's insistence. Darwin wouldn't be at the factory until late tomorrow night. He'd just be rotting in a hotel, and nothing would get done until Monday. His bastard boss just wanted to show his boss how well his department was doing. "To hell with it," he said. "I'm going with Susan tonight anyway." Stopping at a 7-Eleven, he called the airline from his cell phone and changed his first-class ticket to tomorrow. "That'll give me time to sober up," he grinned. Driving slowly, anticipating the pleasure of telling Susan the news, he returned home an hour and a half after leaving. The shadows were getting long as he pulled into the garage. As he opened the door, he remembered and grabbed the door in a panic to keep it from slamming against his BMW. But damn it, the BMW wasn't there. Susan's Volvo was in its place, but his BMW was gone. Susan was truly furious when she peeked through the curtain and saw Darwin driving away. She had warned that son of a bitch not to do that to her again. She wanted a real family life with children and everything else. and her asshole husband only cared about his career. To hell with that stupid bastard, she thought as she took off her clothes to take a shower. She was going out tonight, with or without that son of a bitch. She picked up the phone and called Darla. "Hi, sweetie. Is everything ready for tonight?" she asked. "Absolutely," Darla replied. "The order's placed. I'm ready to go, and Randy's getting dressed." "Wait, honey," Susan replied. "My asshole left for Houston, the most godforsaken place in August, but I'm going to take a shower and be ready in record time. Hey, I'll meet you at your place and we'll go to the restaurant together. See you in 30 minutes, okay? Bring your handsome husband with you. See you soon." Darla agreed. The two women made up and hung up. A few minutes later, Susan was rinsing her short blonde curls in the shower. They reached her ears, and the curls gave her a just-out-of-bed look. Darwin liked it very much. After quickly washing her back, she turned off the tap and grabbed one of the large bath towels. A few minutes later, she was already rummaging through her wardrobe, trying to decide what to wear. She was so annoyed with Darwin that she wanted to look really sexy tonight. Hell, maybe she'd even do something about it. He would never know, and she deserved it. Until that bastard gave her child back, she wasn't going to feel like a married woman, so whatever happened would be on his conscience. She giggled at the unintended double meaning. Picking up the blouse and skirt she was going to wear, she turned to the dresser. She wanted to not only look sexy, but feel bold. "It's kind of nice to dress up like this for Randy," she thought. "Randy has been too obvious with Darwin. Maybe we can talk or something and get him to back off Darwin." She giggled. "Randy will be surprised when Dar finally takes him to the dry cleaner. That big oaf has no idea what my little man is capable of," she thought. "Or my little man's big man?" She giggled again. "It won't be easy to become a soccer mom," she thought, "but I'm looking forward to it. I'll be a good mom." Less than an hour later, she was dressed and ready to go, left a message on the answering machine, and got into her BMW to meet Randy and Darla. She loved her Volvo, but tonight was a BMW night. When he entered the house half an hour later, Darwin called out to Susan, but there was no answer. He didn't wait. He picked up the phone and dialed the code to listen to the answering machine. His wife thought he was on a plane to Houston, and if she was going out, she would leave a message on the answering machine. Susan's voice sounded sweet and friendly. "Hi, guys. We can't answer right now, but we'll call you back tomorrow. Darwin, honey. If that's you, I'm at Darla's for a few hours. Talk to you tomorrow. Bye." God, she couldn't even wait until next weekend. Damn it, he thought. I'm already here, and I'll be damned if I'm going to wander around the house until she gets back tonight. After showering, he put his travel suit back on. He didn't know why he did it. It just seemed like the right thing to do. He was at the restaurant where they had planned to start the evening, a few minutes before the appointed time. Looking around the room, he spotted Susan and her friends in a secluded corner at the back of the restaurant. They were sitting by the window, separated from the rest of the room by a box of ferns. He wouldn't have found them if he hadn't been sure they were there. He headed in their direction, but the arrangement of the tables stopped him. Randy was sitting against the outer wall, with Darla on one side and Susan on the other. Randy had his arms around both women's shoulders. He whispered something in one of their ears, then turned his head to whisper in the other. From where he stood, he couldn't see, but it looked to him like the son of a bitch was licking her ear along with his whisper. The son of a bitch would pay for that. Looking at Randy's hand around his wife's waist, at his hand unconsciously playing with the collar of her almost transparent cream-colored silk blouse, he stopped. If he went over there, he wouldn't be able to stop himself from throwing that man out of the restaurant. This was hardly the scene he wanted to make, and it wasn't the way to make Susan glad he had come. Looking at the three of them, he suddenly realized that under her white blouse, she was wearing a red half-bra. God, up close, he must be glowing like a beacon. As he watched, the waiter brought drinks for the three of them from the bar. They must have just sat down. Randy's glass was half full, as was Darla's. Susan's glass was almost empty, and as he watched, she sent the waiter to bring her a new drink while they studied the menu. The drink looked like one of her favorites, a strawberry daiquiri. Darwin watched as she drank half of it and then set the glass down on the table. Darwin headed to the bar and sat down in a corner where he couldn't be seen but from where he could observe what was happening at the trio's table. After ordering a drink, he asked the bartender to bring him a club sandwich. Darwin sat at the bar, eating his sandwich and sipping his scotch and soda, watching the scene behind the ferns. He couldn't believe his eyes. Before dinner was even served, Randy had his hands down both girls' blouses. Darla showed no sign of indignation, behaving as if her husband groping her best friend was perfectly normal. Perhaps it was. By the end of dinner, Susan had had 2 more daiquiris and was clearly drunk and cheerful. Randy didn't seem to feel the effects of the alcohol, and Darla appeared completely sober. However, knowing her, Darwin was sure she was at least a little drunk. Darla must have been quite drunk for no one to notice. After dinner, the group had an after-dinner drink that looked like a brandy Alexander, as far as Darwin could tell. When the bill came, Darwin watched with disgust as his wife grabbed it, took a credit card out of her purse, and apparently paid the entire bill. Stingy Randy didn't even make an attempt to pick up the check. Instead, Darwin had to pay for his wife's night out on the town while he was supposedly on a business trip. He began to wonder if this was a regular occurrence while he was sweating at work because some idiot didn't believe in lubricating the machinery. That's typical of him, Darwin thought, but he was surprised that Susan had paid the bill. At that restaurant, he would have owed more than $100. When the girls got up to go to the ladies' room, Darwin leaned over his glass, trying not to be noticed. They were giggling and having such a good time that they didn't even notice him. When they passed by, he turned to watch them leave. Darwin looked at them twice. "Damn it, Susan got rid of that red skirt last year. She said it was too tight and not proper for an older married woman and too short. She picked out clothes from her closet that she thought weren't appropriate for a decent wife and mother. And she was right. That damn thing only came down to the middle of her thighs. She couldn't sit down in public without putting on a show. If she hadn't been sitting at the table during dinner, she would have put on a show for the whole room. What the hell was she thinking, wearing that? Not only wearing it, but without her husband." Before the girls left, he paid the bill and went out to his car. Sitting in his company Ford, he watched the 3 tipsy friends get into his BMW. That made him angry, too. It was his damn car. He didn't want that jerk Randy driving it. Sure enough, when the BMW pulled out of the parking lot, Randy was behind the wheel, Susan was sitting next to him, and Darla was in the back seat. Darwin got in right behind them, making no attempt to hide that he was following them. He didn't care if they knew or not. He was furious. In any case, they had drunk too much to notice him unless he crashed into his own car. There seemed to be a lively discussion going on in the BMW, which ended with the girls patting each other on the arms and Randy turning the car around and heading for a less respectable part of town. Parking the BMW on the street, the 3 went window shopping at a 3-screen movie theater showing adult films. Parking directly in front of the BMW, Darwin watched as the 3 decided which movie to see, and Susan went to buy tickets. Randy wasn't going to spend a dime on the evening. His good buddy Darwin was paying for everything. Darwin was even paying for Randy to take his wife to a porn theater. Darwin walked down the street behind them and was close enough to hear his wife tell the ticket taker which movie they wanted to see. To his surprise, none of the 3 noticed him just a few steps behind them as they entered the theater. Watching Randy's hands move from one woman's ass to another in constant motion, Darwin bought a ticket for the same movie. Following them into the theater, he passed through the curtain at the door where 3 men and a baby was playing. The theater was almost empty. Paying no attention to the fact that he might be recognized, Darwin followed them through the curtain. Darla even turned around to see who was crowding behind them. But in the dark theater, with Darwin standing between her and the light, he was just a silhouette, and she didn't recognize her friend's husband. Darwin struggled to restrain himself from punching that bastard Randy and throwing both women over his knee. If it would have made any difference, he would have done so. Instead, he continued to swallow hard to keep from vomiting and stood there staring at the three in front of him. The trio stood looking around the nearly empty hall, not knowing where to sit, until Randy lifted both women's skirts and slapped their buttocks. Stopping at a row of seats about halfway down, he pushed Susan forward so she would walk in front of him. The bastard stuck his hand under Susan's skirt. Randy pulled his wife toward him, holding her buttocks under her short skirt. They stopped in the middle of the row and sat down on either side of Randy. Darwin slipped into the row behind the trio, sitting directly behind Randy. The three huddled together, the girls crowding around Randy, resting their heads on his shoulders. The son of a bitch didn't waste a second and made no attempt to hide what he was doing. Sitting behind Susan and her friends, Darwin was stunned to see that Susan had placed her purse on the seat next to her. He leaned forward and picked it up. Becoming increasingly upset and angry, Darwin leaned back in his chair and watched the three in front of him, turning off the porn movie on the screen. Sitting behind his wife and her companion for the evening, Darwin went beyond the nausea in his stomach, far beyond the searing rage that had filled him when he began to observe his wife's disgusting behavior. Now he was consumed by icy fury. Before, he had been on the verge of losing control completely, but now Darwin was in control of his hatred. There would be no sudden suicide, but there would be no forgiveness either. His wife had chosen this tonight. As soon as he left, she had arranged for Darla and her husband to go out with her tonight. She hadn't just left, which would have angered him enough on its own. He could have understood that, but he would still have been angry. The bitch was now playing the whore. This was the same woman who had pestered him to get her pregnant. She claimed she wanted to raise his child. Not in this lifetime, bitch. Remembering one of the things Susan always carried in her purse, he reached inside and pulled out a small can of pepper spray. This had gone too far. He was sure Randy wasn't the first man to get this close to his wife's body, and he couldn't take it anymore. Leaning forward, he stuck his head and arm between Randy's head and Susan's. There wasn't much room, and he roughly pushed both heads away to make space for himself. First, he turned and whispered in Susan's ear, "I think I'm going home, bitch. The doors will be locked, so find yourself another place to sleep tonight." Susan's eyes widened, and she turned to look at the face next to her. Drunk, she didn't immediately understand what had been said or who had said it. By the time she realized, it was too late. The damage had already been done. The hand Darwin had slipped between Randy and Susan was holding a pepper spray can. Leaning forward, he sprayed it at Susan. It was meant for her eyes, but it worked well on any wet, sensitive tissue. Without waiting for Susan's reaction, he reached across Randy to do Darl a similar favor. Then, leaning back and pulling his head and arm out from under the writhing Susan, he sprayed Randy twice in the eyes. Susan was now gasping for air, bent over in pain as the spray took effect on her most sensitive areas. Darwin leaned forward again. "I'll take my BMW home, but you're not coming back to this house. Goodbye, bitch." Then he threw her purse and the pepper spray onto her knees. Taking a step back, he watched as both women bent over, clutching their crotches. They were in too much pain to make loud noises, certainly not loud enough to be heard over the movie's soundtrack. Randy rolled his eyes desperately, which were watering from the pain. Randy made noises, but they were barely audible over the loud music. He groaned, rocking back and forth in his seat. Outside, Darwin walked over to his Ford and looked around. Down the street was a well-lit, secure parking lot with signs advertising 24-hour surveillance. He drove up to it in his Ford, left the car, and returned to the BMW. When he approached, a couple of punks were examining the car, one of them holding a short piece of pipe where he thought it was hidden. Both punks looked at him closely as he walked toward them, trying to look casual. When he reached them, he stopped, took a step toward them, and asked if they knew where Alex's pawn shop was. He had seen it when he was driving up. The punks looked at each other, and Darwin noticed the wheels slowly turning in their heads as they tried to process what they had taken on tonight. "Sure, man," the one with the pipe started, and his buddy grinned and reached into his pocket. Not wanting to drag things out, Darwin hit him in the groin with the pipe. His knee shot up, lifting him 1/2 meter off the ground. The pain hit him, knocking the wind out of him. By the time he landed on his side, he was almost unconscious from the pain. Without turning, Darwin swung his left arm, extending his fingers forward and clenching them into a fist, as martial artists do, calling it a knife. He couldn't be careful, but he hoped he hadn't killed the bastard when he hit him in the throat. When the street thug fell to the ground, his hands flew to his throat. The brass knuckles he had worn on his fists fell to the street. Darwin picked up the brass knuckles, dragged the two thugs away from his BMW, and threw them onto the sidewalk. The guy whose larynx he had broken seemed to be breathing without much difficulty, so he probably hadn't killed him. At that moment, he didn't care whether he had killed him or not. Getting into his BMW, he immediately pulled away from the curb and drove off. Traffic was light, and he managed to turn the corner before the thugs realized he was gone. He didn't think anyone had seen him, but even if they had, no one in that part of town would have said anything. He got home without incident, locked the BMW in the garage, locked the doors and all the windows in the house. Turning off the lights, he went to bed. He couldn't sleep because he was still overcome with cold rage. He knew he shouldn't drink in this state, and it was another hour before the adrenaline left his system. The sunrise put an end to his nighttime musings. He loved Susan, but the woman he had seen last night was not the Susan he knew. This was a new side of Susan he couldn't live with. If he tried to save the marriage, he would always remember what she was capable of. He wanted children, but this woman was not the mother he wanted for his children. What if they had a couple of girls? The mere thought of it made him want to throw up on the ceramic altar. In broad daylight, Darwin transferred the money from their checking account to a savings account. He left only enough to cover 2 months of regular monthly expenses. He called several credit companies and other financial institutions, then hailed a taxi. The taxi dropped him off a mile from where his Ford was parked at 8 o'clock on Sunday morning, when the walk was comfortable and safe. After paying the taxi driver, he headed for the airport. The flight from Houston on Thursday went without incident and was a day earlier than planned. From the airport, he drove straight to work to meet his boss. There he handed him his resignation letter. This led to a heated reaction. Darwin had always valued his contribution to the company, but he had never believed that the company valued his services. That changed with a loud bang. When he tried to hand in his resignation letter, his boss politely asked him to wait while he consulted with HR. 20 minutes later, Darwin found himself in the CEO's office discussing how much his departure would cost the company. In the end, he agreed to stay on with a new title, Vice President of Corporate Services, and a 35% raise. He was given complete freedom to inspect all of the company's facilities and was put in charge of a small staff. This was agreed upon before he returned to work. Darwin complained that constant repairs were costing the company twice as much as regular maintenance. Over several years, plant managers had gradually reduced maintenance costs to such an extent that downtime was more expensive than keeping the equipment in working order. From that moment on, he would be the one to turn to when something went wrong, and he would be the one to make sure that the factory equipment was in working order. He assumed that his emergency trips would soon be a thing of the past. He would spend the rest of the year traveling, making sure that the reforms he wanted were implemented, and then he planned to stay close to home. When he arrived home in Taurus, Susan was not there. Darwin immediately began packing the boxes he had brought with him on the way home. Before he had finished in the bedroom, he saw that the movers he had called had arrived and immediately began loading the boxes into the truck. It didn't take him long to go through the entire house and gather the things he wanted to keep. He would remember this experience in the future. He used to keep everything that seemed interesting to him, but he would never do that again. By 3 o'clock, he was finished, and the truck had just pulled away when Susan pulled up in her Volvo. She left the car on the driveway and didn't notice that he had returned home until she walked into the kitchen, saw a man drinking coffee in the house, and screamed. Darwin just sat there and stared at her until understanding dawned in her eyes and the tension of fear left her. "My God, Dar, you scared me to death," she finally whispered. "I'm sorry, Susan," he replied. "I wasn't sure you'd be home." "Are you okay?" he asked, looking her over. "I was a little angry on Saturday night. I don't regret doing it, but I hope nothing serious happened." "Well," Susan replied, trying to smile. The smile came out almost sad. "I've been walking funny since Tuesday, but nothing serious happened. Poor Randy, he's in terrible shape. Darla says he'll be all right. For a while, the doctors couldn't tell if his eyesight was damaged." She looked at him seriously, then added, "When you're angry, you go all the way, don't you?" "I've never felt that way before, Susan. My reaction surprised even me. But I didn't expect you to be so promiscuous. I guess one extreme behavior led to another." "Oh, Dar, I'm so sorry. I can explain. It wasn't what it looked like." Darwin stared intently into her eyes for a moment. Then he said, "Yes, Susan." It was exactly what it looked like. She gasped and tried to interrupt him. He simply raised his hand to silence her. "Yes, it was. The woman I married, the woman I loved, would never have gone with another man. We won't go into details about whose husband it was or who else was with you. In the big picture, it doesn't matter. I can't love a woman who behaves like that. I can't trust you enough to leave you alone for a day or two. The woman I saw on Saturday night is definitely not going to be a good mother. And Susan, before you say anything, I've been watching you. This wasn't the first time you've been close to Randy. From the moment I saw you two at the restaurant, it was obvious that you two were a couple. Seems to be the word I'm looking for." Susan choked up again and tried to say something, but the words wouldn't come out. "I've talked to my lawyer, Susan. The divorce papers will be mailed on Monday. Call my lawyer and give him your lawyer's name so we can get this over with. If you don't fight it, I want to make a fair settlement. I'm thinking of giving you the house, the Volvo, and a third of the money that was in our savings account when I left here on Sunday. I assume you've checked and know where I transferred the money." Raising his hand again to prevent her from interrupting, he continued, "I have records of how much was in the account on Sunday, and a third of that amount will be yours. The value of the house and the car far exceeds the amount I'm keeping for myself. I'll keep the cash, my BMW, my corporate retirement account. Yes, and half of the money we get from selling the beach house. Susan," he continued, "if you decide to sell this house, you can find a nice house and live on the remaining money indefinitely, if you're smart. I'm sorry I can't offer you more, but with the money you'll get, you can easily go back and finish your education. I pray that this experience will teach you what you risked with your behavior." Staring intently, and for a long time at the woman he had married, he could hardly recognize the woman he had seen last Saturday. But it was this woman, not the one he had asked to marry him, who would haunt him for years to come. He had to do it. The woman he had thought he was going to marry did not really exist. Susan just stared at him, a tear rolling down her cheek as he finished. "I'm leaving. Have your lawyer call me at work, and I'll give him a number where he can reach me after hours. I'll need time to get settled, and until I do, I can't give you an address. Call me at work next week or on my cell, and I'll tell you where I'll be until I find an apartment or a condo. I'm so sorry this happened, Susan. But I didn't do this. I can't fix this. We can't fix this. I'll let you know when I come to pick up the Ford." With that, he walked out to the garage, got into his BMW, and drove out of the driveway. Susan followed him into the garage, shouting after him, "Dar, it wasn't me on Saturday. Come back, we'll talk, honey, please. Everything got out of control. We can work this out." She was still shouting, now from the top of the driveway as he drove away. Christmas, was something I'd always thought of as kind of sacred in our family. Not sacred in a religious way, not sacred really at all, but in the Ida Weissbrot. The tradition and the baking and the shared warmth and the will to be together, despite however much all of us on some level managed to fuck things up since. It was ours for a decade. Snow, ugly sweaters, too much wine and ear-splitting laughter in my brother's cabin up in Vermont. Then something felt off last year. So when Mom texted, "Christmas is canceled this year, just too broke for a big gathering," and I felt the world wobble. Something was off. Something was severely, severely out of order. I'm Ethan, 34, a marketing manager from Boston. I was married to Claire, or at least I felt as though I was married to her in spirit, if not in the flesh. We have been together for 9 years and married for 6. Claire was beautiful, the perfect Instagram aesthetic, smart, ambitious, and everything she touched turned to gold. I used to travel for work a lot in that, but I wasn't missing Christmas. Never. So when Mom texted me on December 10, I had a bad feeling. Too broke? Sure, times were hard, but this was our tradition, and not a soul had asked if we'd like to chip in. I called my sister Emily. "Yo, Em, what do you think about Christmas?" There was a pause. "It's an experience, Ethan. It really is. You should ask Claire," she said. "Claire?" Another pause. "Look, I've probably already said too much." My chest tightened. What the hell was happening? I accused Claire that night. She sprawled on the couch, thumbing her phone with a half-filled glass of wine, or half-empty, depending on your point of view. "Claire, did you just tell my family not to celebrate Christmas this year?" She blinked. "What?" Number. Her eyes betrayed her. "You sure?" "Because, as Mom told me, they called it off because they are too broke to have a big gathering. But no one talked to me, and Emily said I should check with you." She sighed, dramatically. "Ethan, I thought, with your job shit and us being so far apart, maybe let's just take a break. Why would that be so bad?" My heart stopped. "A break? Claire, it's Christmas. We always go." "I only needed time," she said, raising her glass to her lips. "Plus, I'm so done pretending that we're all okay. I'm so done with smiling through this when I want to rip him up. You're always gone. We're roommates, not lovers." I felt like I'd been slapped. But the end of the chicanery was not there. That one night after she had gone to bed, I was on the couch on our shared iPad. There was an alert on Instagram. Claire tagged in at Bryce T. Designs' story. Wait, Bryce? Her friend from the gym? I opened the story. They were there, Claire and Bryce, in some cabin. My family's usual cabin. She had on a red plaid shirt, the very same one she donned last Christmas. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I packed up a bag and drove 4 hours to Vermont. I had the spare key. The snow compacted beneath my boots as I exited onto the deck. Music played softly inside. Mariah Carey. The air inside was scented with hot chocolate and cinnamon. So much for too broke. I opened the door quietly. Laughter. Then I saw them. Claire and Bryce sitting close under a blanket by the fire. My mother, my sisters. Everyone was there. "Ethan!" my mom gasped. Claire sat up as though she had seen a ghost. "You're not allowed to be here," she said. The men's charge thundered by, and my brother David stood in a defensive posture. "Hey, man, just calm down." "I am not going to calm down," I said. "You lied to me, all of you." Claire stepped forward. "Ethan, please." "You said we called off Christmas," I said. "Because you're too broke. You are the one who told my family don't bother inviting me. And you're shacked up with Bryce or whatever." No one spoke. My mom burst into tears. "I'm sorry," she said. "Claire told me you are splitting up and she needs Sace. We didn't know." She lied. Claire said nothing. Bryce stood up. "Ethan, man, don't." I looked him in the eye. "Stay away from me." And then I left. Claire tried to reach out. She called, she texted, she even emailed. I didn't reply. I handed her divorce papers after New Year's. She was shocked. "I thought we'd talk about it," she told me when we met during mediation. "Talk it through? You've just conjured up an entire Christmas cancellation so you can elope with some other bloke. You got my family to help you cheat on me." "You were never here," she said, cold then. "You were always traveling. I needed something real." I laughed bitterly. "And instead of talking to me, you played puppet master." Her face dropped. She hadn't counted on my fight. But I did. It was as bad with my family. A week later, my sister called me. "I didn't know, Ethan. I swear." "Claire said you were with someone else." I didn't say anything. My mom wrote me a letter. She apologized, deeply, tearfully. But I needed space. And I spent the rest of the winter all by myself for the first time in years. And strangely, it helped. What I remember most was the night I walked into a little cafe near my apartment, and how it was snowing. I just wanted heat and coffee. That's when I met Lena. She was reading A Man Called Ove, and her glasses were sliding down her nose and her cheeks were red from the chill. She looked up and smiled. "Long day?" she asked. "Something like that." We talked for hours. She was a school counselor, down to earth, quiet, real. I didn't tell her about Claire, not at first. But she hadn't asked for polished stories. She liked the messy truth. So I told her. She didn't pity me. She just listened. I started to hang out with Lena more often. Not like with Claire. Not in that rushed, passionate way. This was different. Easier. We'd try to cook dinner. She'd bring me cookies from her students. That was her thing, and I'd play old jazz records. In May, I got the divorce. Claire hadn't shown up at the last court date. By November, Lena and I were still hot like fire. We weren't a couple yet, but we were going to be. Then, one evening, my mother called. "We're inviting you for Christmas, Ethan," she said gently. "No pressure, just, we miss you." I didn't answer right away. "Will Claire be there?" I asked. "No," she said. She hasn't been in touch, Ethan." I glanced at Lena, sipping tea on my couch. "Okay," I said. "I'll come." The cabin. There was something very weird in being back there. But this time I took Lena with me. She didn't say much, just being polite. My family loved her. Emily pulled me aside. "She's good for you," she breathed. "I know." Christmas morning and snow, laughter, no lies, no betrayal, just my family. And something else. That evening, Lena and I went for a walk in the little patch of woods behind the cabin, and the snowflakes that fell landed in her hair, and I looked at her smiling. "You look happy," she said. "I am." And then I kissed her. And I knew. I thought Christmas had been canceled, literally lost last year, so life has barely felt joyful. But canceled was the illusion, the lie, the relationship I was holding on to even when it was already over. Claire had unveiled her true nature to me. But in the rubble of that betrayal I found honesty, and maybe even love. So no, Christmas was not canceled, it just changed. And this year, the day was finally a reality. The end.